Good morning and welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Chuck Salmons, panel moderator and current president of Ohio Poetry Association. I'm pleased to welcome you to the poetry panel, The Art of Poetry, featuring 5 of Ohio's wonderful poets and also friends of mine, I'm glad to say. Many thanks to our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And thanks to our official bookseller, The Book Loft of German Village in Columbus. You can get copies of the books featured at the festival at bookloft.com. In a moment, I'll introduce each of our poet panelists and share a bit about them and invite them to read a poem. You can learn more about them and their publications on the Ohioana Book Festival website, which includes links to their personal websites. For everyone in the Zoom audience, we'll be leaving the last 10 minutes of this session for audience questions. So if you'd like to ask our panelists a question, please enter it into the Q&A feature. Do not use the chat feature, we will not see it. So with that, I want to introduce our first poet, Darren Demaree. Darren is the author of 16 poetry collections. Most recently, A Child Walks in the Dark from Harbor Editions last year. He's the recipient of a 2018 Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award, the Louise Bogan Award from Trio House Press, and the Nancy Dew Taylor Award from Emery's Journal. He is the editor-in-chief of the Best of the Net anthology and the managing editor of Ovenbird Poetry. He's currently living in Columbus, Ohio with his wife and children. His website is darrencdemaree.com. Darren, welcome, and bless us with a poem, please.
Love to, Chuck. Thanks, buddy. This is You Might Choose to Read These Poems from A Child Walks in the Dark. I told my children you might choose to read these poems in the bareness and anxiety of your young adulthood while you search for me in the thousands and thousands of poems I have written so that I could explore, so that I could explain, so that I could hide and lie about some small terribleness. And it gives me endless joy that you will find me here, right now, as bare as you are, but feeling no anxiety at all because I am with my children in some small way in the future, when I love you even more than I already do, because that's how real love works. It grows with the epic. It encircles the epic until you cannot tell why or how any of this began, but you know that if there is such a thing as a soul, it exists to be buoyed by moments like this.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you, Darren. We'll be coming back to Darren here shortly. Our next poet is Manuel Iris. Manuel is Poet Laureate Emeritus of Cincinnati, Ohio. He served as Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2020. He received the Mérida National Award of Poetry, which is a Mexican award, in 2009 for his book Notebook of Dreams, and the Rodolfo Figueroa Regional Award of Poetry for his book The Disguises of Fire in 2014. In 2016, 2 different anthologies of his poetic work were published, The Naked Light in Venezuela and Before the Mystery in El Salvador. His first bilingual anthology of poems, Traducir el Silencio, Translating Silence, was published in New York in 2018. This book won 2 different awards in the International Latino Book Awards in Los Angeles, California in that same year. Iris has published poetry, essay, and translations in magazines and literary journals from Mexico, Spain, Chile, Cuba, Colombia, Portugal, France, the United States, and Angola. He's truly an international poet. His poetry has been included in several Mexican as well as Latin American and American poetry anthologies. He's given talks, lectures, and readings in literary events, academic conferences, cultural centers of Mexico, the US, and Europe. In 2021, he became a member of the prestigious System of Art Creators of Mexico. He holds a BA in Latin American Literature from the Autonomous University of the Yucatan in Mexico, a MA in Spanish from the New Mexico State University, and a PhD in Romance Languages from the University of Cincinnati, where he now lives. His website is manueliris.com. Welcome, Manuel. Please read a poem for us.
Hello. This is the first time that I am part of the Ohioana Book Festival, so thank you for having me. I chose a really short poem because I read every poem twice. I'm going to read it in English and then in Spanish, which is the original language. The poem is called Clarification. It is a lie that trees do not know the world. A tree travels by virtue of its birds, and it also travels inward when sinking its roots. It all makes sense. Nothing is more fixed to the earth than a tree. Nothing moves more through the air than a bird. It is a fruit that flies. And poetry is the fact that they need each other. Aclaración. Es mentira que los árboles desconocen el mundo. Un árbol viaja por medio de sus pájaros y también viaja hacia adentro al hundir sus raíces. Todo tiene sentido. Nada está más fijo en la tierra que un árbol. Nada se mueve más en el aire que un pájaro. Es un fruto que vuela. Y la poesía es el hecho de que se necesiten. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. I remember that poem from your book. It's a beautiful poem. I love that closing line. All right, our next poet, one of my good friends, Paula Lambert. Paula has authored several collections of poetry, including The Ghost of Every Feathered Thing, which is just out from Future Cycle Press, and How to See the World from Bottom Dog Press in 2020. That book was a finalist in last year's Ohioana Book Awards. She's been awarded PEN America's Lingle Raman Prize for mentorship. Lambert's poetry and prose has been supported by the Ohio Arts Council, the Greater Columbus Arts Council, and the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. Her work has been nominated for several Pushcart and Best of the Net prizes. Her website is paulajlambert.com. Paula, please read a poem for us.
Thanks so much. I want to say I've heard Manuel read that poem before, and it always takes me a minute to recover. So I'm going to do the best I can here as follow-up and read about a bird called the huatzin, which is a South American bird. And this poem is where the title of my book comes from, The Ghost of Every Feathered Thing. The poem is How History Helps Us Survive, Huatzin. When the nestling spies the viper, letting go becomes a kind of grace. God is the ghost of every feathered thing that ever dreamed of drawing breath. God surrounds us. And it's not the splash of the river that tells us we've been saved. It's the sound of what swims toward us, the new danger, the ongoing need to survive. History is older than hope. Newly doused and still missing muscle, the nestling knows this, how to open his wings, how to claw his way back to where he belongs. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Beautiful. Okay, well, our next poet is Mirna Stone. Myrna is the author of 6 books of poems, most recently The Resurrectionist Diary from Dos Madres Press last year. A 2-time Ohioana Book Award finalist, her work has appeared in 9 anthologies and in over 50 journals, including Poetry, Southwest Review, the Massachusetts Review, Boulevard, Nimrod, and River Styx. She is the recipient of 3 Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Awards, a full fellowship to Vermont Studio Center, the 2001 Ohio Poet of the Year Award, and the 2017 New Letters Prize in Poetry. Stone is a founding member of the Greenville Poets, based in Greenville, Ohio, which has met monthly since 1984, a very prestigious group. Her website is myrnastonepoet.com, and I'm happy to welcome you, Myrna. Please read a poem for us.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to read 2 poems, 2 sonnets actually, from a 21 sonnet sequence entitled Excerpts from Katerina Vermeer's Daybook. The 26th day of April in the year of our Lord, 1673. Even after all these years, Johannes compels my attention, his tread light and quick upon the stairs to our chamber door, desirous enough to roil my heart within the cincture of my linen stays. He wheedles to paint me thus, my mulberry bodice unlaced, my petticoat a plush of yellow carmine pooling at my feet, my cheeks madder red. His grounding tint, a deeply pearlescent dusky gray, he argues, is already laid down on the canvas. Yet I resist. Immodesty, I tell him, is not within your view, and what would Mutter say if you persist? Still, it seems that what my will disputes, my heart, in the end, shall choose to mute. The 5th day of July in the year of our Lord, 1673. 6 days ago, the raw ache of intractable sorrow descended upon us like a plague. Jaeger, our sweet boy babe, who loved most the versal lingo of the courtyard's fat, feather-crusted chickens, and often mimicked it, was at 1.5 sorely beset in the bleak midnight hours betwixt vespers and matins by a sweating sickness and its fever. Neither pleas nor promises, nor a grim last bloodletting altered his course, and by dawn he was dead. In the last of June, we buried him at the old kirk in a riot of bird song. Nightly, I pray that his soul may forever abide with our lost others, and in their grace happify.
Wonderful. Thank you, Myrna. All right. Our 5th poet of the morning is Laura Grace Weldon. Laura Weldon has served as Ohio's 2019 Poet of the Year and is the author of 4 books, most recently the Halcyon Poetry Prize winner, Portals. Her poetry and creative nonfiction appear in Diode, Verse Daily, Cultural Weekly, and others. She works as a book editor, teaches writing workshops, and maxes out her library card each week. Her website is lauragraceweldon.com. Welcome, Laura. Please read a poem for us.
Thank you, Chuck. This is one of those pieces that arise spontaneously. In this case, I was reading all sorts of journal studies about viruses, as you do, and listening to music. So this is titled Listening to Philip Glass's Changing Opinions. There may be no pinnacle higher than music. Granted, we invent, build, trade, choose what to believe, even sequence the human genome. The latter leading us to discover we likely owe who we are to ancient viruses. Easily half our genetic code arises from bygone viral invaders, some performing tasks critical for higher order thinking. Maybe music is a murmur, a pulse left by RNA eons ago, an imperative prompting us to bang on skins, pluck tightened cords, blow through reeds, create what we call music, when all along it infected us, made us hosts of a concert started long ago in early light.
Ah, love that ending. Thank you so much. Well, I'm sure the audience can tell we have 5 distinct but really wonderful voices here. And, the title of our panel is The Art of Poetry, which offers kind of a broad avenue, right, for discussion. So you all are familiar with the questions that are coming, but I tend to try to keep things as organic as possible and just let the conversation go where it wants to go. But the first question, which may seem like a softball, maybe isn't. And that question is, poetry does play an important role in your lives, in my life, probably in the lives of those who are watching right now. But aside from its tangible qualities as a written art form, what do you think distinguishes poetry from other forms of art like painting or dance or sculpture? And is there a volunteer who wants to tackle this one first? Myrna's got her hand up.
I'll jump in. Yeah, this really intrigued me because I'd never thought about this necessarily, even though I've done visual art as well as poetry. But it seemed to me when I thought about it that there is a level of intimacy and interplay that happens when you write a poem and you, especially when you're saying things that you've never imagined you would say to the world, or at least the world that may read your book, part of the world, maybe one person, who knows, maybe my mother, if she would. But what I'm saying is there is a level of intimacy in that, in saying things, you find yourself, I do at least, being surprised by my obsessions and by the things that I'm willing to say that go out there into the world in the pages of my books. And then I know that somewhere there are people who are reading that, who are going to open themselves up to that. And they're going to be, I think, brave in going on a journey with me or taking their own journey that maybe is reflected in mine. So there's this level of interplay and intimacy that I just never thought about before you asked that question. And that's the truth. So I think it takes bravery on both parts, the reader and the writer. And I think that's that symbiosis that happens sometimes is just a beautiful thing, because there's lots of truth and pain and glory that can be disseminated and recognized and elaborated upon by the person reading that text.
If I might follow up, because I'm also a visual artist as well. When we got that question, Chuck, my first inclination was to sort of wonder, is it really that different? Because there's a lot we do when writing that's even as far as sculptural, on the page, the arrangement of words on the page. I think arguably, certainly there are musical and rhythmic elements to it. Maybe the individual words on the page might be akin to brushstrokes. There's a lot that's analogous. And for me, moving back and forth between visual art and writing, poetry in particular, is very fluid. It's very fluid. But my husband and I spent a good deal of time talking about this last night over dinner. He kind of persuaded me that language does make it different and does make it special. And it's very important for the writer, him or herself, theirself, and the reader to figure out how to articulate what it is to be human, the human condition, and there's an awful lot we have to process living in this world day to day, living in this world, most certainly the last couple of years. There's an awful lot that we have to figure out how to process and articulate to be able to talk about it with other people. So maybe just language itself is what distinguishes it and makes it especially special.
I think it's the music and the energy, right? I think poetry is the most playful of those art forms because you're exerting different techniques, different strategies, whether it's utilizing different poetic forms. But we hit the gas and hit the brake more often, and can be more playful, and repeated phrases and using lots of different techniques to try to get the most out of the art form. But I've seen great poetry that just is 8 lines of thud, thud, thud. And I've seen poetry that can actually dance and do different things like that. And it's really just sort of utilizing all of those different techniques, or you can really take the reader on an experience where you're really being playful with them. And it does profound or simple or funny or loving or any of those techniques, those things that can come out of a poem. You can do any of those things. And it just depends on how you're pressing those particular levers in that particular piece.
If I may, this is a very difficult question that I need to answer in different ways. As I'll have to say that when we ask poets, why is poetry important? We're going to find reasons, because that's what we do. somehow the question is asking us, what are you good for? And what you do is important. So we are going to find a justification in it. And we're not only going to find a justification, but we're going to make a case for the importance of poetry. Because if being poets is what we are, what you're asking us is asking about our own existence and about our existential justification in the universe. So basically the question is, what are you good for? And what are you doing? And why is what are you doing important? So knowing this and having disclosed this, I want to tell you that my answer is completely selfish because it cannot be otherwise. Poetry is important to me because it's the language that I speak better.
Yes.
I believe that poetry is a translation of silence. I believe that poetry is a way, like Paula was saying, of articulating things. And it's the way in which I articulate better what I'm thinking and in which I understand better the articulation of others. I do love visual arts. I studied classical music for years. I have a very musical, just like Darren, a very musical ear, and I write led by music. However, in my particular case, poetry is the way that I approach reality with more clarity or with more certainty, I believe, as much certainty as you can have with art. But I do understand people that understand the life in colors, or others that understand it in melodies. Because even though this is the way that I understand art and that I appreciate art better in the world, I also see that it's not the same. Like I will forgive Thelonious Monk for not being a poet. I will forgive Debussy and Eric Satie for not being poets. I will forgive Picasso, and but I would never forgive Wisława Szymborska if she was doing something else, though.
Mm.
So that is my personal connection with this question. It was difficult for me to respond this question without disclosing that it's a very selfish answer.
A great answer, Manuel. Laura?
I'd like to jump in first by saying that I missed the email that gave these questions in advance. Probably my fault. Just didn't notice that one.
I'm getting
and I initially am feeling as if not sure who said it, but poetry is like music's less talented cousin. You know, that poetry originally was always set to music and always chanted or sung. And I kind of feel like I write poetry because I can't sing, or because I can't dance, or because I can't sculpt. And I think all human beings are deeply creative and deeply playful if we let ourselves be. And this is the avenue through which I am best able to let that inner part of myself live. You know, if I had other talents, maybe it wouldn't turn into poetry.
That's really interesting. I was thinking about something, well, things that both Myrna and Manuel said, and it sort of brings me to that second question that I in the list that I had sent out that unfortunately Laura didn't get to see ahead of time, but I'm sure can answer. That, you know, that there's this intimacy and there's a certain amount of surprise that comes with it when you're writing it, especially. And, you know, the second question sort of, or excuse me, I guess it was a third question, but it's one of the questions was about, you know, how does experiencing poetry, whether you're reading it, writing it, hearing it, how does that play a role in how you experience the world at large? And I know for myself as well, going back to something Myrna said, I'm surprised sometimes by what comes out of me through the pen. And I'll go back and I'll read it and I'll think, is that really how I see things, right? And so I'm wondering, you know, does the activity of taking part in something poetic, whether you're writing, reading, listening to it, does it affect the way that you experience the world in some way? And you know, if you have a specific example of when that may have happened to you, feel free to share it.
I'm going to jump in, and because there's a little hesitation here, and say that it is 100% how I experience the world, how I process what's going on in the world. If for some reason I'm not able to get to writing and poetry, I start to get very anxious. You know, we have to process such a lot in the modern world. And, you know, we're constantly ping-ponging back and forth between rage and, you know, fear and, you know, yeah, joy is in there sometimes, but it's this very visceral ping pong kind of thing. For me, you know, experiencing the world. And for me, it helps me to just sort of focus it all and look for the larger metaphor behind whatever is happening, look for how it connects us, you know, to one another, to, you know, to the universe generally. And I learned so much more about the way other people see and experience the world by reading what they have to say. You know, picking up a book like Natalie Diaz and saying, oh my gosh, or Joy Harjo, or I don't even know who. I mean, it just helps us to see the world. It helps me to feel calmer, to feel more hopeful, no matter what's going on, to feel connected to the history of the world. And that makes me feel hopeful about the future of the world. It helps me to feel connected. So it's absolutely vital to my existence, really. That's not hyperbole overstating. It's how I'm able to bear the world, I think, really, and find my way back to joy within it.
Can I jump in here too, Chuck? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah, and then Darren, yeah.
Well, ditto almost everything that Paula just said, but there's another element for me. I don't think I'm worth a hill of beans if I can't write a poem. And the only reason, I can honestly say, the only reason that I've been able to keep writing all these years and have the number of books I have, because I didn't start till I was about 50, is that I had a group and they were behind me. And I thought, I want to be a poet. I've said I'm a poet, but if I don't produce poetry and don't work, what's the point? You know, it's not a real thing. So for me, there's another element. There's that business of being able to go in my head and in a sense, disassociate myself. It's sort of the opposite of what you're asking, from the immediate surroundings, from the world, from my problems, from all the issues that I see myself having at this point in my life. And they are plentiful. So that ability to go into my head for hours at a time and find things that I didn't know I knew, or things that I didn't know I needed to know, is just, it is the thing that saves me. I mean, it's almost like religion in a way. So that's another part of it, but also what Paula said, it's both, maybe both sides of the same coin. I don't know.
I think it's such a versatile art form in terms of it's elegant when we need it to be elegant. It's profane. It's protest music. It's all of these things that we find when we need. And for me, I've spent so much of my time reading poetry, traveling. I legitimately believe at least 50% of the poetry you should read should be translated works, or if you have a gift for languages, learn those languages, because I approach poetry at such an elemental level of word usage and turn of phrase and different things. And if you can put me in a landscape and phrased in a way that I'm not used to experiencing, then I think that's when you really travel. I have plenty of friends who are from Ohio, or look and talk like I talk, or write like I write, or try to. And I don't get a lot out of those folks. There's beauty in the work that they do, but I don't get to travel with them. I get to travel when I read poet like Ase Berg, when I read, Neruda, when I read Andre de Drummond. When you get to read these different artists approaching things at a different angle and choosing phrases and images that you could never conjure up on your own, I think that's when poetry is at its best. And it's, as someone who hasn't gotten to travel the world as much as I would like, it's the most I've gotten to travel is when I experience poetry.
Manuel?
Yeah, for me, poetry, and I also echoing what Darren was saying, it is about traveling. I do believe that we are all migrants, right? We are migrating from one silence to another, and we don't know what is this. So even if we don't move, we're constantly migrating, and words migrate, and ideas migrate. And I am obsessed with the possibility of foreseeing what is beyond this world. I do believe that poetry is a possibility to see transcendence from here, to foresee something that is beyond our flesh, something that is beyond our reality, something that is there, while using the senses. This Rilkean idea that beauty is a revelation of divinity that we can get through our senses, right? So I do believe in beauty, and I believe in poetry as my way to connect with something that is using language to connect with something beyond language, is using our senses to communicate with something that is beyond our senses, is using our body to connect with something that is beyond our body. So I do believe in that travel. I do believe in seeing that. And in my case, poetry is every time the revelation that everything that exists existed and will be, is the revelation that there is something beyond. And it's always the revelation of blinding beauty, not in the sense of just something pleasant but something deep and true,
Mhm.
I'd like to speak up a little bit, and it's hard to do after these eloquent voices, but I'd like to speak up a little bit for the magic that's there too, that inhabits us and stays with us, and lines occur to us as if, by an unseen hand when we most need them. And that magic is, as Darren said, it lets us travel, and not just to places we haven't been in the world and through perspectives we haven't seen before, but in time as well. And it's, many art forms have that quality, but to be able to participate in that is just, it's kind of being part of that magic.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well, Laura. And I was thinking, Manuel mentioned Szymborska and Darren mentioned Neruda, and I was thinking about those two poets came to my mind as well, like exactly while you all were speaking about how I love to read them because I get to go someplace with them through their poetry. And it's, I've never been to those countries that they hail from, so it's a way for me to maybe get to experience those countries and experience the cultures. And so that sort of leads me to the next question, but Paula, you had your hand up, so go ahead.
Yes, I think what we're talking about is really important. This idea of travel and translation and reading other voices. I do want to take slight issue with something Darren said. And I do want to say that if we're reading across the full breadth and scope of Ohio poets, I think there is plenty of traveling to do, even right here with our own voices, because we have an amazing array of Ohio poets and Ohio voices across cultures represented even just here. So that's one tiny thing, Darren, I wanted to take issue with. But yeah, I love everything that we're saying here. Yeah.
The panel is getting interesting.
Well, it could get even more interesting with this next question that I had in the list, and I think it gets at a pretty broad issue. But I mentioned culture. We've been talking about other cultures, and poetry is a way to experience other cultures through words. And so, as an art form, in your view, each of your views, what role can or does poetry play in American U.S. culture or even other cultures. I know, Manuel, you are a Mexican American, so you're probably going to have some different perspectives on this. But I'm always curious, in the 21st century now, with technology the way it is, and especially with the way things are, politically in our country right now, what role can poetry play in our country and beyond? So
I think that we are living right now in this surreal time where the arts, one of the functions of the arts is to disturb us and trouble us, to, you build muscle by breaking muscle down, and you build your mind and your spirit by, in many cases, the things that trouble you or hurt you or cause you grief. And we have this attack on the arts, and particularly the written word, because that is so feared or misunderstood, or we don't have time to go into those reasons, but that's precisely what art is for.
anyone else?
If I can interject, and I promise that against my nature, I will be brief. I think that art does not do, in poetry in particular, does not do one thing. It can be the protest when we need to protest. Darren was talking about how it can be elegant when it can be elegant, it can be silly when it needs to be silly, etc. I particularly use poetry to create silence. I believe that we live right now in an era full of noise and speed, where everything is very fast, and we are flooded by information and flooded by images. And I believe in poetry as a way of slowing down and a way of responding with wisdom, which is beyond intelligence and beyond us when we write even. I believe in poetry as a way of creating a bridge and understanding what is alike with one another. When we talk about exploring other cultures to the poem, is not only to see how are we different, but also to understand how are we alike. I have felt understood, and I have felt connection with poets of other cultures more than with some poets of mine, because they are talking at the end about the issues of feeling lonely or loved or heard or hurt, etc. I cannot think of poets that have less to do with me than a British man born in the 15th century writing about two Italian teenagers that fell in love and commit suicide at the end. But I, in Mexico, not speaking English yet, reading a Spanish translation of William Shakespeare, felt something, because the human nature is there. So right now, when we fear so much the other, when we are so prone to disrespect each other, when we are so prone to doubt of the humanity of others, I want to believe that poetry helps us to see us in the other. Borges said something really beautiful about love. The Argentinian poet said that love helps us see others in the way that God sees them. And I like thinking that poetry does the same.
Wow. If I can jump in here, Manuel, that was epic and so astute and so right. And I was going to say that that's what poetry can often do. It can bridge the differences. And we are so divided. The country's so divided. The world is so divided. There's so much danger, so much that can be lost. And we seem cast in cement in our differences. rather than trying to find ways in which we are all human. The great subject of poetry, I think, underneath everything, even the playful stuff, is love and death. I mean, what else is there? What else is it that drives us with those twin things? So it's that ability to read a poem, and or two people who may be completely divided, to read a poem and find in it our humanity and our common humanity. We need respect now more than anything else, and maybe poetry can take a big role in that. I certainly hope so.
I think the best of what we can do as artists is deal with the tethers of the world. And what we're reacting to now more so than anything is all the people who want to cut the tethers, that want to sort of aggravate the violence to the tethers. And what we can do is we can do a lot of things with them. We can dance with them. We can try to reconnect them. We can try, as Manuel said, to find the silence of just holding them and keeping them together. And I think if we can do that and then incorporate our own personal reactions to things, and adjust the tenor of how we're experiencing things in the world, then will ultimately lead to that connection we're all hoping to make when we write a new poem.
I think there's much here that's just been so eloquently said. And I'm not sure what I have to add really, except that, yeah, all of the ways that poetry, art generally, but maybe poetry especially, provides that bridge and those connections, and that potential for healing and for drawing people together is the very reason that, as Laura started with, that it's under attack, and wanting, that people want to remove it from bookshelves and from libraries and from schools. And what is so beautiful about poetry is also what's threatening to certain elements, and that's for me personally. I take that very seriously as a poet, and we do have to be brave to be poets, and we do have to be joyful and playful and all those other things, because it's important to keep that as a placeholder in the universe. Play and joy and love and all those things. It's really important. But it's important for us to be aware of really what is the power that we have. It's important to take that seriously.
Yeah, I think so, Paula. And it's almost 11:45 already, and so this part of our discussion is actually a great time to go to our Q&A. Maybe just a couple minutes early, because our first question that came in from an anonymous participant is, what is your view of the current attempt by some states to ban certain literary works, information, and discussion from children and youth in public schools, which might affect universities as well in their educational and other programs? I mean, we've heard a lot of you have already sort of alluded to this, but if you want to tackle that directly.
I feel like I just did. So
yeah.
So I don't know who else might want to speak up there.
Well, and I know Manuel teaches at a university, so maybe he's got some particular insights there.
Well, I am currently teaching at a university, but I'm teaching high school full time too. What do you want me to say? I'm a writer. I think that they believe that they are afraid of words, but they are really afraid of humanity. Yeah. And it is a battle. Censorship is a battle that is always lost by the censors. They can win a small battle and prohibit these books in the classroom, but not in the streets, not in the bookstore, not in the discussions. And at the end, the reality that these books are talking about, it will be there. at the end, all of these things is trying to stop a symptom, but this is not a disease. This is precisely what happens when a society is healthy. It wants to talk about things. It wants to discuss things. We have to remember the language is for the brave, and weapons are for the weak, for the scared, for the cowards. Those are the ones that get ammunition that is not rhetorical. And I trust in the youth and in the wisdom of teachers. I trust in the youth and in the wisdom of their parents. I trust that we will find the words to say what we need to say. I believe that it's obscene trying to obstaculize intelligence and thought precisely in the place that should foster them. But I don't know of any time in history where this has lasted and been successful.
Yeah, well said. Anyone else?
I want to dive in, even though I just said I wouldn't. But I just love what Manuel said about what we're really afraid of is humanity. And I think this is something I truly, truly believe, that often the conflict that may be going on outside of us, however we want to explain that, in the culture, in the country, whatever, I think we have to look really closely at how that aligns with the conflict within us. I think that's what, as a writer, that's part of what helps me so much, is to understand my own anger, my own fear. It's why it's helpful to read other people, to understand their anger, their fear. It's a communication. And I think oftentimes, maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but it's something I believe sincerely. I think often what we're afraid of, I'm going back to Manuel's phrase here, I wrote it down, really afraid of humanity. I think often we're afraid of what's within ourselves. And we need to process that, and find our way back to what we're comfortable with within ourselves. And then we're better able to say, maybe I do have more in common with that person or that group or whatever than I thought, because I'm afraid of some things too. There's an awful lot I don't understand either, and we need to have the conversations. And again, I think there are entities that don't want those conversations to be had, but I think it's essential that they are had even within ourselves, maybe within ourselves first and then with each other.
I would like to go on a limb that's probably farther out on the limb. We are part of this planet, and the things that function the best on this planet, whether we're talking societies or schools or institutions of any kind, including government, is when we live by the systems that make our planet work. And successful ecosystems are built on diversity, on self-assembly, interdependence, adaptation, balance, and beauty. I mean, I could keep going on. And when we push against those, when we want some kind of static, the way a steady heartbeat is not as healthy as a variable heartbeat, we're pushing against everything that ever has worked well on this planet for some kind of, steady state that is, that need is built out of fear. I felt like I had something else to say about that, and it's completely escaped me. The one other thing I wanted to say about that is research has shown, we've all struggled with people in our lives who believe things that sound very limiting or cruel. And you can't overwhelm people like that with facts. You can't overwhelm people who don't agree with you with anger. What really works to step across and build bridges with other people is sharing our stories, our very most personal stories of what it's like to live in this particular body in this particular place with those particular experiences. And poetry is one of those incredible bridges that shares stories, often in kind of a underhanded way that you don't even realize you're taking into yourselves the stories of other people. That's my lean.
Sorry. I'd like to add to what you just said, Laura. And first of all, you have all been so eloquent. I don't really have anything to say germane to what you're just saying, but there is something called StoryCorps, and you may be familiar with it. And that's one way in which I see people being drawn together. I mean, poetry is certainly a huge way, but StoryCorps is people telling about people that they love and why they love them, and their stories, their particular stories. They sit in a booth. We've done this. Our daughter set up a StoryCorps interview with us years and years ago when it was new in Grand Central Station in the basement. And we made a tape of it. The tapes go to the Library of Congress, and it's about regular people talking about experiences with people that they had issues with or people they loved and still had issues with, about problems, about humanity. It's just a wonderful thing. And if we could get poetry as widely disseminated as that, it could absolutely have the same sort of effect. So,
Well, well said, Myrna. StoryCorps, that's a great example. Poetry Corps, maybe we need to get that,
yes.
get that started. We do have a couple more questions, and we're running short on time. So the next question from Alhad Hussein. Hi, just a small question. What do you think about dark or dystopian poetry? How does it look to the readers? Does it leave a bad impression on the readers? I know what I would say, but what would you say?
So can you repeat part of that? Did you say dark and dystopian?
Dark or dystopian poetry.
I'm wondering how all poetry isn't about exploring darkness and dystopia. Honestly, that's my first reaction, but maybe the writer, the questioner means something specific that someone else would be better able to reply to.
I think that's a natural move. I think poetry can inhabit those stories, and I think it can even inhabit science fiction and different things like that. The narrative that can be adopted is limitless, and if writing dark or dystopian poetry is the outlet that particular poet finds, then good to him, good luck. I can't wait to read it,
Yeah, exactly, Darren. That was my answer that came into my head, is that there's a poetry for everyone. There's so many different kinds of poetry, and so leaving a bad impression, I don't know, who cares, right? Like, you'll find that audience is what I want to say. So there's another question, which I think is a really good one, a really important one, from Barb Caldwell. She asks, what type of advice would any of you give to beginning poets, maybe someone who just has 1 or 2 poems published?
Well, I would say read. The poets, just go crazy, buy as many books as you can after leafing through them a little bit to find the poets that absolutely float your boat. I mean, just and read them, and read them first. Read those books repeatedly. Read them first. You have to like them first, but read them first for the music and the construction and the feeling it gives you. And then after you've done that a couple of times, read those books again, read those poems again for how those poets put those poems together. How did they do that? In other words, I want you to study them, because that's how I learned how to write poetry. I was 12 years old. I fell in love with poetry. I thought, I'm going to be a poet, but I didn't, I didn't exactly work at it the way I should have until I was in my mid-40s and got really serious. And that's what I did, because so much of it I didn't understand. So much of it I thought, how did they do that? That's so fabulous. How in the heck did he do that? Or how in the heck did she pull that off? You can find it out by just studying it until it becomes part of your lexicon, in a sense, and your methodology. And then read everything that strikes a bell in you, anything that strikes a bell in you. That's how you become a poet. You're a reader first. You're a lover of poetry first, and then you can find out how to do it.
I would also recommend to make a clear distinction between poetry and literature and in the literary life. Do not confuse your success with your number of publications. Do not confuse your success with your number of awards. Do not confuse the importance of a poet with the length of his biography. Do not try to achieve that as a measure of you as a poet. Be true to your poetry, be true to your truth. Not everybody is going to write poems that are MFA poems. Not everybody is going to write poems that are the result of a project. Not everybody is going to just find who you are as a poet and commit to that, commit to you. And all of the other things will happen, but don't, like a friend of mine from Venezuela said, don't put the horses in front of the chariot, in front of the cart. You know, worry about the poem, worry about telling a truth, worry about those things. And then all of those other things are the consequence. The reward for a poem is a poem. The reward for writing a poem is the poem. Don't look for other things. They will come, but don't waste your time worrying about those things.
And don't be afraid of writing a bad poem.
Yes.
I think
yes.
so much
Oh,
creativity,
absolutely.
so much expression gets short-circuited by someone shaking their head and going, well, it's not any good. I write bad poems all the time. It is okay.
Mhm.
Just keep writing and keep searching. I don't feel half as good when a book comes out as I do when I was writing the individual poems that are in the book. It is all part of a process. It's all part of exploring language. And that's why we do what we do. Everything else is a byproduct. So if you're writing bad poems, keep writing bad poems. Eventually, one of them is going to catch your eye or catch someone else's eye, and it might surprise you what other people like, and just keep doing it.
I would also add, hang on to the bad poems, because there might be a seed to something that, you know, the unconscious tends to be ahead of itself, I think, you know, and sometimes we write something that's not working out right now for whatever reason. Sometimes they are just plain bad, but sometimes there's a seed of something you can work out later. Once you're in the right place with the right experience, with the right whatever, a lot of times things will come back at, keep reading, keep writing the bad stuff. Don't worry about publishing. That'll come when it comes. You know, you'll find the right place for your science fiction poems, your dystopian poems, your, you know, joy to the world, nature poems. There's, for as many poets as there are at least an equal number of readers that really not just want to hear it, but need to hear it.
Yeah. I want to add to something Myrna said about reading as much as possible, and that would be to go and listen to poets as much as possible. I think that's just as important as reading as much poetry as you can. Well, believe it or not, we are at 11:59. We are near our hour. I want to thank all of you so much. This has been a great discussion. We could probably go for another hour. But thanks to Darren, Demaree, Paula Lambert, Mirna Stone, Manuel Iris, and Laura Grace Weldon. You might want to hold up your books. This is a good time to do that, to show the audience what the covers look like so that they can get out there and order those. You will not be disappointed in any of these books, which you can get at bookloft.com through the Book Loft of German Village. I want to put a quick plug in for the Nfsps Poetry Convention, which is going to be hosted by Ohio Poetry Association June 23rd through 26th in Columbus. And you can get all the details at ohiopoetry.org. Thanks to all of you for your work today. And to those of you out there, be well.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Miriam.